The sound beneath the house, it began with a sound, not her scream, not her gunshot, not even a cry for help, just scratching. The workers renovating the abandoned farmhouse thought it was rodents at first. The house had stood empty for years, its wood warped by damp summers and its roof sagging under too many winters. No one had lived there since Edward Whitmore disappeared. But the scratching did not move, it did not scurry, it did not stop. When the floorboards were pried up in the front room, the smell of old earth rose into the air. A narrow crawlspace revealed itself beneath the foundation, too shallow for comfort, too deliberate to ignore, and carved into the underside of the beams were marks, single lines, grouped in fives, counted carefully, and beneath some of them names. The wood had darkened with age, but the cuts were deliberate, not accidental, not random. Someone had been keeping track. By the time the local clerk arrived to examine the structure, the tally marks had already been sketched into a notebook. No one knew what they meant yet, but they knew what they resembled, a record, and records suggest repetition. Within a year of Whitmore's final public appearance, 7 men had vanished from the surrounding counties. Drifters, laborers, sharecroppers, no strong political ties, no wealthy families pressing for investigation, just absences. At the time, the disappearances had been treated as unfortunate but unremarkable. Men left town often in those years, work was unstable, debts were common, lives were fragile, but now there were marks under the floor. Grouped, counted, intentional. The house had not been built to protect what was inside, it had been reinforced to conceal what was beneath. And that is where this file begins. The house that listened. South Carolina, 1879. The house had a sound, not her noise, a sound. Old houses always do. They breathe differently than new ones, they shift under weight. They expand in heat. They whisper at night. But this house did not whisper, it listened. At the edge of the county road, beyond a stretch of dying oaks and a fence that leaned as if tired of standing, the Whitmore farmhouse sat alone. It had been built before the war. It had survived the war. It had survived everything that came after Reconstruction. Economic collapse, social unrest, quiet resentment. It survived because its owner understood survival. Colonel Nathaniel Whitmore had once commanded men. Now he commanded silence. In 1879, the South was a place pretending to be healed. The war had ended 14 years earlier, but defeat does not dissolve pride. It reshapes it. Plantations had shrunk, wealth shifted, old power structures cracked. But men like Whitmore did not vanish, they adjusted publicly. Whitmore was generous. He donated lumber to rebuild the church roof. He extended loans to struggling farmers. He hosted modest dinners that smelled of civility and redemption. He spoke softly of unity. But power, when stripped of spectacle, becomes internal, controlled, private. And the Whitmore house reflected that shift. It was not grand, not anymore. But it was structured with precision. The windows were narrow, the doors thick, the interior hallways strangely long. Visitors often commented on how quiet it felt inside. Not peaceful, quiet, as if the air itself was holding something back. The first disappearance happened in early spring. Elijah Boone, 22 years old, recently arrived from inland Georgia, temporary laborer, strong, quiet, no family in the county. He had been hired to repair fencing on Whitmore's outer property. The last confirmed sighting placed him, walking toward the farmhouse at dusk. After that, nothing. When questioned, Whitmore remained composed. Elijah was paid in full, he said. He mentioned heading north for better wages. The sheriff accepted this. Young men drifted often, work was scarce, opportunity unpredictable, movement was common. But there was something in Whitmore's delivery that unsettled Deputy Howard Pritchard. Not what he said. How evenly he said it. No irritation, no surprise, no visible inconvenience, just completion, as if Elijah had fulfilled a purpose. 3 weeks later, a seamstress named Clara Mayfield began working inside the Whitmore house. She was local, widowed, known for delicate stitching and quiet endurance. She told neighbors she had been hired temporarily to mend household fabrics. 2 weeks later, she failed to appear at church. Her cousin visited the farmhouse. Whitmore received her politely. Clara left, he said. She claimed a better opportunity in Charleston. No forwarding address, no written notice, no payment receipt. Clara's cousin felt something close around her chest as Whitmore spoke. Not fear, pressure. Like being assessed, measured, dismissed. She left without argument. The sheriff logged the disappearance, then closed it. Seasonal labor was unstable. Widows relocated, the town absorbed it. But something subtle began to change. Farmhands stopped accepting work at the Whitmore property after sunset. Travelers reported seeing lantern light flickering beneath the farmhouse floor late at night. Children claimed they heard knocking sounds from beneath the porch. Adults told them it was settling wood, wind through boards, imagination. The third disappearance unsettled even the complacent. Thomas Reed, sharecropper, father of 2, debt to Whitmore documented in county ledgers. Thomas had taken a private meeting at the farmhouse regarding loan terms. He was seen entering. He was not seen leaving. When his wife inquired, Whitmore assured her Thomas had stormed off in anger. Pride wounded, he said calmly. He spoke of relocating to Florida, a vague horizon, a direction impossible to verify. Thomas' wife wept on the courthouse steps. The sheriff investigated lightly, found no signs of struggle, found no blood, found no broken doors, just silence and Whitmore, always composed, always helpful, always rational. But patterns form in the subconscious long before they form on paper. By late summer, Whitmore's name carried a faint distortion in conversation. Not accusation, something softer, uncertainty. Neighbors described an unease when walking near the farmhouse at night. Dogs refused to approach the back foundation. One farmhand quit after a single evening shift, claiming he heard whispering under the floor while sweeping the pantry. When pressed, he could not explain the sound. It wasn't wind, he said, it was counting. He left the county 2 days later. Whitmore's demeanor never shifted. If anything, he grew more gracious, more generous. He began inviting towns, men to inspect his property casually. See for yourselves, he would say. They walked the halls, examined the cellar, noted nothing unusual. But none of them crawled beneath the floor. None of them lifted the boards, because in 1879 suspicion required proof. And proof required courage, and courage is rare when stability feels fragile. But inside the house something else existed. Structure, recent modifications, reinforced beams beneath the master bedroom. Extra latches added to interior doors, a narrow crawl space that had not existed in original building plans. Whitmore had renovated quietly. He claimed it was to repair war damage. No one questioned further. Because Whitmore funded the local schoolhouse expansion that year. He financed seed purchases after drought. He helped rebuild a barn destroyed in a storm. The town depended on him. Dependency breeds blindness, and blindness breeds longevity. But not invisibility. Because one person did not look away. Margaret Hale, widow, sister of Samuel Hale. Samuel had taken temporary carpentry work repairing roof beams at the Whitmore house. He had mentioned feeling uneasy. Said Whitmore walked the halls at night without lantern light. Said he heard scraping sounds beneath his bedroom floor. Then Samuel disappeared. Whitmore claimed Samuel had been paid and left before sunrise. Margaret did not accept this. She visited the farmhouse herself. Whitmore greeted her on the porch, smiling. She noticed his hands steady, but his nails carried fine splinters fresh. She asked to see payment records. Whitmore paused for only a fraction of a second, then nodded. Records are archived, he said. Archived, an unusual word for a private household. Margaret left without evidence, but with certainty. Something inside that house was not departure, it was retention. 3 weeks later, Margaret Hale vanished. No witnesses, no note, no forwarding direction. The sheriff filed a report, closed it. Winter approached. The Whitmore farmhouse stood unchanged. Lantern light still flickered late at night, and beneath the floorboards scratches had already begun. Not frantic, not chaotic, deliberate. Names carved slowly into the underside of wood, one beneath the other, as if someone were counting days, or counting people, or counting down. And the house did not whisper, it listened, because something beneath it was still alive, and still waiting. Beneath the boards. South Carolina, 1879. The scratching did not begin all at once. It began with hesitation, a shallow line carved into soft pine, testing resistance, testing time. Whoever lay beneath the Whitmore farmhouse did not carve immediately. They listened first. They listened to footsteps above, measured them, mapped them. The weight of Whitmore's stride was distinctive, slow, even, never hurried. He did not stomp, he glided, and sometimes in the deep hours after midnight he would stop directly above the crawl space and remain there, motionless, listening back. The crawl space was not meant for comfort. It was narrow enough to prevent standing, low enough to compress breath. The air shifted only when the wind aligned with foundation cracks. Most nights it did not. Dust settled thick against the throat. Breathing required patience. Patience required will, and will fades when darkness becomes permanent. But whoever lay beneath that house did not surrender immediately. They scratched a name, Elijah Boone, slowly, carefully, because names resist erasure, and erasure was the threat. Whitmore had begun renovating the farmhouse in early 1879. He claimed it was structural reinforcement, weather damage, war deterioration. But invoices reveal additional lumber ordered beyond necessity. Extra beams, iron brackets, interior latches, and one carpenter recalled being instructed to leave clearance between floor joists beneath the master bedroom. Unusual, but not illegal. Whitmore supervised the work personally. He stood with hands folded behind his back, observing, correcting angles, measuring spacing. He did not raise his voice, he did not explain purpose, he simply adjusted. After construction completed, he dismissed the carpenter 2 weeks earlier than planned, paid him generously, and requested no further inspection. That carpenter left town by autumn. The second name scratched beneath the boards was Clara Mayfield. The carving is smaller, more cramped, as though space had shifted, or strength had declined. The letters are uneven. Not from lack of education, from trembling. Above that crawlspace, Whitmore resumed his public routines. Church attendance, loan meetings, measured generosity. He began speaking frequently about discipline. Society fails when boundaries dissolve, he told one gathering. Correction prevents collapse. Correction. He used that word often. Correction does not sound violent, it sounds paternal, necessary. He framed himself as stabilizer, and when framed properly, even cruelty can masquerade as order. The third name is Thomas Reed. But beneath it, faint, nearly erased, are 2 short vertical marks. Tallies, the beginning of something. Thomas may have been the first to understand the pattern, because the marks beneath his name are grouped in 2s, 2 days, 2 attempts, 2 failures. We cannot know, but the shift from names to counting is psychological evolution. Counting implies system. System implies repetition. Whitmore was not chaotic. He believed in progression, isolation, observation, compliance. He walked the halls at night because he needed confirmation. Needed to hear breath beneath boards. Needed to know containment remained intact. Containment is power distilled. Margaret Hale's name appears forth. Her carving is deeper, angrier. The wood splits slightly around the letters, and beneath her name a single scratch that curves, then stops. Perhaps interrupted. Perhaps silenced. Margaret was the first who confronted Whitmore directly. The first who looked him in the eye and did not lower her gaze. Whitmore did not strike her publicly. He did not threaten her. He simply invited her inside. "Let us discuss your brother calmly," he said. Witnesses saw her enter, no one saw her leave. The sheriff noted, no signs of struggle. Because the struggle did not occur in visible rooms, it occurred below them. By late autumn, Whitmore had refined the process. He staggered disappearances, never too close together, never too obvious. He selected individuals with minimal immediate protection. Migrants, widows, debtors, those whose absence could be explained. He did not target randomly. He targeted plausibility. Plausibility is camouflage. The 5th name beneath the boards is Samuel Hale, Margaret's brother. His carving is precise, centered, almost calm, which suggests something chilling. He may have carved knowing the pattern already existed, knowing others were present, or had been, and beneath his name 3 tallies grouped tightly. 3. The grouping suggests days or attempts, or others still alive at the time. The crawl space did not hold many at once. Space was limited, which means turnover, and turnover implies escalation. Whitmore's private journal during this period becomes more revealing. Resistance decreases after containment. Correction yields silence. Silence stabilizes environment. He believed what he was doing was necessary. He believed autonomy created disorder, and disorder threatened his reconstructed identity. Before the war, he commanded men openly. After the war, he commanded invisibly. The crawlspace was not rage, it was reclamation. He reclaimed control. One body at a time, one name at a time, one tally at a time. Winter tightened the ground. Cold compresses sound. The house grew quieter. Lantern light beneath the pantry became more frequent. A farmhand reported seeing Whitmore kneel on the kitchen floor late at night, ear pressed to the boards, listening, not in panic. In assessment, the farmhand quit 2 days later. The 6th and 7th names beneath the planks are barely legible. Smaller, crowded, carved closer together as though space or time was diminishing. And then something changes. Beneath the 7th name appears a vertical grouping of 5 tallies, 5. Carved deeper than the rest, grouped with intention. And once tallies begin grouping in 5s, counting becomes formal. Formal counting means target, and targets imply limit. Whitmore was not carving the names. The handwriting differs, the pressure varies, which means someone beneath the boards was recording, tracking, keeping record of survival, or death. But Whitmore was counting too, in ink, in ledgers, temporary labor entries, unrecorded dismissals, archived payments, the arithmetic above the floor aligned with the arithmetic below it. 2 ledgers, one visible, one hidden, and in both the numbers were increasing. The final detail from that winter unsettles investigators most. Under the last scratched name before the pattern shifts entirely to tallies, there is a single word barely visible. Not help, not escape, not remember. It reads still, still breathing, still waiting, still alive, or perhaps still here. Which means at least one person endured long enough to understand what Whitmore was building. Not just a prison, a system. And systems do not collapse by accident, they conclude. And when systems conclude, something changes. The names stop, the tallies accelerate, and the house begins to feel heavier, as though it is carrying something it was never meant to hold. And above it all, Whitmore continues smiling. Measured, patient, listening. The counting ritual. South Carolina, 1879. The first time someone tried to escape, the house almost gave itself away. It happened during a storm. Late winter. Rain striking the roof in uneven bursts. Wind pressing against shutters hard enough to mask smaller sounds. The crawl space shifted that night. Water seeped through foundation cracks, dripping rhythmically onto packed earth below. Drip. Pores. Drip. The sound beneath the floor changed, and Whitmore heard it. He always heard it, because he had trained himself to listen. Isolation alters perception. Time beneath the boards did not pass in days, it passed in footsteps. In meals lowered through narrow gaps, in the scrape of boots overhead, in silence. Silence was the worst, because silence meant observation, and observation meant expectation. Whoever remained alive beneath that house began counting differently as winter deepened. Not just tallies of days, tallies of Whitmore's visits. He came at regular intervals, morning, evening. Midnight, knelt above the floorboards and pressed his ear to the wood. He would remain there for long stretches, not speaking, just listening, waiting for breath, waiting for movement. The act was not accidental, it was ritual, and ritual transforms cruelty into structure. The storm masked something that had not been masked before. Movement, subtle, measured, a shift in weight beneath the floor. A slow drag toward the outer wall where rainwater softened soil. It was not frantic. Frantic creates noise, noise creates consequence. It was calculated, because whoever remained understood Whitmore's pattern, understood his timing, understood the intervals between meals, understood the gap between his listening rituals. The wood above the crawlspace had weakened, not visibly, but from beneath. Small splinters had been loosened. One beam had been worked repeatedly at its joint. Not enough to collapse, enough to test. The storm provided cover. And for the first time since the spring, the house did not fully control the sound. Whitmore noticed the shift immediately. His stride changed that night, faster. He moved through the hallway without lantern light. He did not stumble. He knew every plank. He knelt at the pantry floor and listened. There it was, movement, faint, but different, not breathing, intent. His jaw tightened, not in anger, in calculation. Escalation was required. Systems adjust when variables change. He rose slowly, retrieved tools, reinforced additional iron brackets along the pantry hatch, added a crossbeam beneath the joists. The sound beneath stopped. Not because hope ended, because opportunity closed. The next morning he brought no food. Silence is punishment. Silence is correction. In his journal, an entry from that week reads, resistance resurfaces during environmental interference. Correction must follow. Correction. He believed himself educator. He believed pain, though never described as such, was temporary inconvenience in pursuit of compliance. He did not write about suffering. He wrote about outcome, and outcome required endurance. Below the floor a new pattern began. The names stopped. The tallies multiplied, not marking days, marking something else. Intervals between breaths, perhaps intervals between meals, perhaps intervals between visits. The grouping of 5 became consistent. 5 strokes, pores, 5 strokes, pores. The carving deepened, the wood splintered at edges, because desperation increases pressure, and pressure leaves mark. In early spring a traveling preacher arrived in town. He spoke of repentance, of hidden sin, of judgment that cannot be escaped by position. Whitmore attended the sermon, sat in the front row, head bowed, still. Witnesses later described his composure as unnerving. When the preacher declared that no sin remains buried forever, Whitmore's hands tightened on the pew rail, not visibly, not dramatically, just enough. After the service he donated generously. Reputation must be maintained when external noise increases. Control above ground balanced instability below it. The second escape attempt was subtler, not structural, auditory. During one of Whitmore's listening rituals, the breathing beneath the boards stopped entirely. For several minutes, no movement, no shifting, nothing. Whitmore remained kneeling, counting silently, 1, 2, 3. If breath had ceased permanently, the system required adjustment. If it had not, it was defiance. After an extended pause, a single inhale returned, faint, but audible. Whitmore smiled slightly, not relief, recognition. The subject still responded to stimulus. The experiment continued. The final name carved beneath the boards before the pattern shifts entirely to tallies is different. The carving is steady, centered, not cramped. It reads Elijah Boone again, which means Elijah survived long enough to carve his name twice. The second carving appears lower, beneath the first set of tallies, as if claiming space, as if refusing erasure, and beside it a new word. Not still, not forgive. One word, count, not plea, instruction. Count implies awareness of system. It implies someone understood Whitmore's method. Understood that he was measuring something, and decided to measure back. Spring approached, snow melted, ground softened, and with soft ground comes vulnerability. Foundations shift, structures crack. Whitmore knew this. He ordered additional lime deliveries, increased wood shipments, requested iron reinforcements. Not publicly explained, not questioned, because he was Whitmore, and Whitmore rebuilt. Always rebuilt. The tallies beneath the boards increased rapidly during that period, grouped tightly, carved deeper as if time shortened, as if conclusion approached. And Whitmore's journal entry from late spring reads phase nearing completion. Not interruption, not crisis, completion. Which means the storm did not disrupt the system, it accelerated it. The house did not whisper, it did not groan, it did not reveal, it held. But beneath the pantry floor the final tallies were being carved, and whoever carved them understood something Whitmore did not. Wood decays, iron rusts, foundations shift, and eventually someone lifts the boards, counting cuts both ways, and this system was almost ready to collapse. The tallies beneath the floor had accelerated. The grouping of 5 had become grouping of 10 deep strokes carved with visible force. The wood beneath the pantry hatch was splintering from repeated pressure. Whoever remained below was no longer conserving strength, they were racing something, time, or Whitmore's intention. The final name carved before the tallies overtook the surface entirely was faint. Almost erased by overlapping marks, it read Margaret, which should have been impossible, because Margaret Hale had disappeared months earlier, unless she had not been alone, unless Whitmore had underestimated survival. And underestimation is where systems fracture. One afternoon in June, Deputy Pritchard returned unannounced. He had begun reviewing old reports quietly. 7 disappearances within 1 year, all connected to Whitmore's property. All dismissed with similar explanations. He told no one he was returning. He wanted surprise. Whitmore answered. The door himself, calm, measured. But his collar was unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled, not typical presentation. The deputy asked to inspect the pantry floor. Whitmore hesitated, not long, but long enough. Then he smiled. Structural repairs, he said. Storm damage. He led Pritchard inside. The pantry hatch was reinforced with new iron brackets, fresh, unweathered. The deputy crouched, pressed his palm to the wood, warm, despite the mild afternoon. He asked if anyone was beneath the house. Whitmore answered evenly. No. Pritchard listened. Nothing. Because whoever remained below understood silence as survival, and Whitmore understood that silence meant victory. For the moment. That night, Whitmore descended beneath the floor for the first time, not to observe, to intervene. The crawl space was tighter than before, the air heavier. The tallies covered nearly every accessible plank. Grouped, stacked, layered, count upon count, and at the far end, Elijah Boone lay against the foundation wall, alive, barely, but alive. Whitmore studied him without visible anger, only irritation. The system had exceeded expected endurance. He had calculated decline, not persistence. Why count? Whitmore asked quietly. Elijah's voice was faint. To make it real, real. The word unsettled Whitmore more than defiance would have, because his system depended on abstraction, on reduction, on turning names into numbers. If numbers became real again, the structure cracked. Whitmore remained in the crawl space longer than usual that night. No shouting, no chaos, just conversation, measured, and when he emerged his expression had changed, not panicked, determined. Resolution had shifted. The next morning, Whitmore ordered additional lumber, more lime, more iron. The delivery receipts show increased volume beyond reinforcement needs. He had decided something. The journal entry from that week reads adjustment required. Control must be permanent, not correction, not compliance, permanent. The tallies below ceased abruptly after that entry, not because they ended voluntarily, because carving stopped. And when carving stops mid, patent conclusion has begun. Deputy Pritchard returned 2 days later with a warrant. Minimal authority, but enough to search. Whitmore greeted him with visible fatigue, unusual. Inside, the pantry hatch had been sealed completely, bolted, newly boarded. The deputy demanded it be opened. Whitmore complied. The crawl space beneath was empty, clean, lime scattered across the earth. The tallies had been sanded partially, but not erased fully. Wood resists total erasure. The deputy counted what remained, 32 visible tallies, partial names, fragments. He felt something twist inside his chest. Where are they? He asked. Whitmore did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the floorboards above, at the house he had built around control. And for the first time he seemed uncertain. People leave, Whitmore said finally. They always leave. The deputy did not arrest him. There were no bodies, no living victims, no direct proof. Just scratches, just lime, just suspicion, and suspicion without evidence dies quietly in court. Whitmore knew that. He had counted on it. Whitmore returned above ground slower than usual. The house felt narrower, ceilings lower, air thinner. He stood in the pantry staring at reinforced beams that once symbolized control. Now they felt like proof. Proof that something had required containment. And if something required containment, then something had existed. and existence invites question. Deputy Pritchard returned one final time that autumn, not with a warrant, not officially, just a visit. He stood on the porch and looked at the Whitmore house as if seeing it for the first time. 7 families, he said quietly. Whitmore did not respond. 7 names, the deputy continued. 7 disappearances. Whitmore adjusted his cuffs. People move, he said. People vanish. It happens. The deputy looked past him into the hallway. I think you counted on that. The sentence hung there. Whitmore's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted. The deputy left without arrest, because suspicion without bodies remains rumor and rumor fades. But suspicion plants, and planting requires no proof to grow. Winter returned, the house cooled. Whitmore stopped kneeling, stopped listening. He avoided the pantry altogether because silence had become louder than sound. At night he dreamed of tally marks stretching endlessly, grouped, stacked, layered, and each grouping of 5 no longer represented a person. It represented a decision, a step, an escalation. He began counting in his sleep, whispering numbers, grouping them, repeating patterns, because once counting begins it does not stop easily. The system had collapsed quietly, not through exposure, not through arrest, through inversion. Whitmore had built structure to measure others. In the end, the measurement turned inward, and nothing is more destabilizing to a calculating mind than realizing it has been counted too. Exposure through decay. South Carolina, 1882. Control rarely collapses in a single moment, it thins. Whitmore continued living in the house for 3 more years, 3 quiet years, 3 winters, 3 summers heavy with humidity. Outwardly, nothing changed. He attended church, managed land transactions, spoke calmly in public, donated modestly. But privately, something had shifted beyond repair. He no longer entered the pantry, not fully. He avoided stepping directly over the reinforced hatch. He walked around it, as if the wood might respond, as if silence might break. The town's perception had changed, not openly, no one accused him, but invitations slowed, conversations shortened. Merchants became polite instead of warm. Reputation, once firm, became cautious, and cautious reputation is erosion. Deputy Pritchard retired in 1881. Before leaving office, he documented the disappearances again. 7 names, 7 dates. 1 property repeatedly connected. He lacked proof, but he wrote everything down, because writing is preservation, and preservation outlives denial. In early spring of 1882, heavy rainfall struck the region. Floodwater rose near Whitmore's property. Soil beneath the foundation shifted. Hairline cracks appeared along the pantry wall, small at first, then widening. Wood swells. Iron loosens, lime hardens but does not bond forever. One evening, as Whitmore crossed the pantry floor, a sharp splitting sound broke the air, not collapse, but fracture. The reinforced crossbeam beneath the hatch had cracked under pressure from settling soil. Whitmore froze. For a moment he stood perfectly still, listening. The house answered with a long, low creak. The same sound he had once trained himself to detect. Only now it came from above, from the structure itself. He backed away slowly, because for the first time the house was making noise without him. Repairs were ordered immediately. 2 laborers arrived the next morning. They removed the pantry hatch entirely. Whitmore remained present, watching, silent. When the workers descended into the crawlspace, one of them called upward, "There's carving down here." Whitmore did not respond. The worker brushed soil aside, ran his fingers along the beam. Tally marks grouped, deep, layered, some sanded, some intact, and beneath one joist a name still visible, Elijah Boone. The worker climbed back up, face pale. "What happened here?" Whitmore answered evenly. "Old tenants marked boards for inventory." The explanation was thin, but plausible enough to avoid immediate escalation. Still, the workers exchanged a glance, and glances become conversation. Conversation becomes retelling. Retelling becomes suspicion. Within weeks, Deputy Pritchard's replacement reopened the file, not officially, but informally. 7 disappearances. Physical revealing of tallies, structural reinforcement around a concealed crawlspace. The pattern had always existed. Now it had evidence, not bodies, not witnesses, but physical record, and physical record shifts rumor into inquiry. Whitmore was summoned. He arrived composed as always. When asked about the tallies, he repeated his explanation: inventory marks, structural notes, nothing more. The deputy asked about the names. Whitmore hesitated for half a second, then replied common names. But common names do not repeat across missing person reports, and repetition tightens narrative. The house inspection revealed something else. Beneath the lime, soil had compacted differently in one corner of the crawlspace. Disturbed earth behaves differently from untouched ground. It sinks, subtly. The deputy ordered limited excavation. Whitmore objected, firmly, but lacked authority to prevent it, and when the soil was cleared, nothing was found, no remains. No direct evidence, only deeper lime, and beneath that stone it was inconclusive. But inconclusive does not mean harmless, because doubt, once official, spreads faster than rumor. Whitmore's composure thinned after the excavation. He began keeping shutters closed during daylight. Lanterns burned longer into the night. Neighbors observed pacing through front windows. The man who once measured breath beneath his floor now moved restlessly above it. Counting had returned. But not in tallies, in steps. He walked the hallway repeatedly, counting them, turning, repeating. Structure attempts to reassert control when exposure threatens it. But structure built on concealment cannot survive transparency. The final erosion came quietly. In late autumn, Whitmore's land transactions were reviewed by state auditors for unrelated tax discrepancies. Nothing criminal, but enough to delay income. Enough to strain finances, enough to weaken influence. The same month, 3 families publicly refiled disappearance reports. They cited the tallies, cited excavation, cited Deputy Pritchard's documentation. No arrests followed, no indictment issued. But Whitmore's name entered public record beside 7 missing persons. Once a name attaches to disappearance repeatedly, it does not detach easily. He sold the house the following spring, at reduced value, left town without formal announcement, no farewell gathering, no church speech, just departure. The new owners removed additional floorboards during renovations. They discovered more carving further back in the foundation, faint, almost erased, but visible, grouped, stacked, layered, and beneath the final set one last word: witness. Not plea, not accusation, witness. Because whoever carved it understood something essential. Proof does not require survival, it requires record. Whitmore was never charged, never convicted. No body was recovered, no confession signed. But his name faded from respect into caution, from caution into avoidance, from avoidance into isolation, and isolation for a man who built systems around control is decay. He died, years later in another state, not infamous, not celebrated, just diminished. But the house remained, and the carvings remained, and the names remained in county archives. Because structure built on silence eventually fractures, and when it does, it leaves marks. Marks that wait for someone willing to lift the boards. The arithmetic of silence, South Carolina. Many years later, the house stood for another 30 years. Owners changed, walls were repainted, floorboards replaced in sections. Children ran through hallways that once carried measured footsteps. The pantry was converted into storage. No one listened to the floor anymore. Time does something interesting to places like that. It does not erase them, it dulls them. The tension softens, the story thins, until it becomes anecdote, until it becomes rumor, until it becomes nothing. But wood remembers pressure, and foundations remember weight, and records remember names. In 1896, a county surveyor documenting structural aging noted unusual carvings beneath the pantry joists. He described them simply: multiple tally marks grouped, appear intentional, no elaboration, no connection drawn. But the note entered record. Years later, Deputy Pritchard's old documentation was rediscovered during courthouse archiving. 7 disappearance reports, all dismissed, all connected to Whitmore's land. The tallies were added to the file. Still no bodies, still no confession, still no indictment, just Patton. Patton is powerful, because Patton does not need emotion, it does not need testimony, it does not need drama, it only needs repetition. The 7 names reappeared in official ledger books decades later. Margaret Hale, Elijah Boone, Thomas Redding, Isaiah Clark, Jonah Price, William Dawsey, Samuel Gray. 7 names grouped. Just like the tallies, 5 strokes across line, 5 strokes across line, 7 individuals reduced to Patton beneath a man's house. But reduction does not eliminate existence, it only delays recognition. What makes this file disturbing is not the violence. There is no recorded violence, no documented brutality, no courtroom confession. What makes it disturbing is structure. Whitmore did not lash out in rage, he did not strike in impulse. He engineered silence, he relied on predictability. On the assumption that poor men can disappear without consequence. On the belief that reputation outweighs suspicion. On the comfort that without bodies nothing sticks. He counted on absence, and for years he was correct. But here is what he did not calculate. He did not calculate wood fibers preserving indentation. He did not calculate soil settling unevenly. He did not calculate that her deputy would write everything down. He did not calculate that future renovation would expose reinforcement. He did not calculate that silence can turn from shield into accusation. He built a system around control. But control requires continuous management, and once management stops, decay begins. Slowly, quietly, invisibly, until the structure collapses inward. There is something psychologically revealing in the final carving beneath the floorboards. Witness. It suggests that whoever carved it understood something larger than survival. They understood record. They understood that even if no one rescued them, the house would speak eventually. That wood under pressure keeps memory. That lime cannot erase indentation. That systems based on invisibility eventually become visible. Whitmore counted bodies, but someone counted him, measured his visits, measured his corrections, measured his escalation, and recorded it, not in ink, in wood. He died in another state years later, obscure, financially diminished. His obituary mentioned land development and civic involvement. No mention of disappearance. No mention of tallies. No mention of crawlspaces. History often writes softly about men who harmed quietly. But archival record does not forget so easily, and the house remained long enough for Patton to solidify. If you walk that land today, nothing marks the location, no plaque, no monument, no memorial, just soil, grass, wind. But, beneath that earth once stood a system built on silence. 7 names beneath a pantry floor. 7 tallies grouped deliberately. 7 disappearances treated as coincidence, until coincidence became structure. And structure became file. There was no dramatic trial, no public reckoning, no satisfying justice, just exposure through decay, just erosion of reputation, just slow collapse, and sometimes that is how real power ends, not with flames, with fading. But here is the part that matters most. If Deputy Pritchard had not written the names down, if the surveyor had ignored the carvings, if renovation had never lifted the boards, if someone had not paid attention to Patton, then 7 disappearances would have remained tragedy, not strategy. That is the difference. Tragedy is random, strategy is designed, and this house was designed. Whitmore believed silence was protection. He believed absence erased consequence. He believed that without proof there is no narrative. But narrative does not require confession. It requires alignment. 7 missing men, reinforced crawlspace, carved tallies, financial shifts, departure after suspicion, individually coincidence, together arithmetic. And arithmetic does not lie. The boards were eventually burned during demolition, the house replaced. But the carvings had already been documented, photographed, filed, preserved, because record survives structure, and record survives men. The names scratched under the floorboards were never meant to be seen. They were never meant to outlive the man who silenced them. But they did. Because someone counted back, and in the end that is the quietest form of resistance, to be counted, to be recorded, to refuse erasure. If those floorboards had never cracked, if rain had not shifted the foundation, if a deputy had chosen convenience over curiosity, 7 names would have dissolved into rumor, and Whitmore would have remained respected. That is how close history comes to silence. This file did not end with arrest. It ended with exposure. And exposure is slower, colder, more permanent, because once a pattern is seen it cannot be unseen. This was one house, one system. One man who believed control was permanent. But there are other houses, other structures, other floorboards no one has lifted yet. Other patterns still waiting to align. And in the next file the evidence is not carved in wood. It is written in ink. And the dates do not match. If you are ready to open that ledger, I will see you in the next file.